that was refused. No.
When you got those materials, what was done with them?
Well, over the course of the next month or so, I looked at them. It became my responsibility. The defense lawyers met over a couple of days in November, early November. By that time, Jim Cooney had become involved in the case, and all of us met for a couple of days to discuss where we were going from here. And assignments were given, and it fell upon me in the defense to look at and analyze and sort of spearhead whatever it was that we were going to do with the DNA evidence, because again, to be quite candid, the attorneys for Collin and Reed knew that there was no connection whatsoever between their clients and any of the DNA testing that had been done. So it, again, was sort of my duty to look at the DNA stuff, and that's what I did.
And what did you do to try to understand the information that you got?
Well, I had talked earlier in the summer when I knew that this task would fall upon me. I'd talked to a couple of lawyers in Washington named Rob Carey and Chris Manning, who worked at a firm called Williams & Connolly, and they were very close friends of the Evanses and had offered their services in any way to help Joe and I with Dave and the rest of the kids' defense. And when I had initial discussions with them, Rob Carey said that he could consult with Hal Dedman, who is a former head of the FBI lab and is an expert, and had agreed to make himself available for consultation at some point in the future if we needed him. And I asked Rob to ask Mr. Dedman if a person who knows absolutely nothing about DNA would like to try to find out some things about DNA, where would you send him? And Rob did some inquiries and told me to go to Amazon.com and buy a textbook about DNA. So I did, and I read it, and as I was reading it, I read it in conjunction with looking through these 1,844 pages of documents, and that's what I did.
In that time period over the next month, can you give an estimate of how much of your time you spent going through this documentation?
I can't tell you exactly, but I can assure you it's somewhere in the 60 to 100 hour range. I mean, it's the amount of work that I did to try to figure out what was in these materials and to bring it to the attention of other lawyers and to bring it to the attention of our clients and to try to run it by somebody who knew DNA and to try to put it into a workable report in the form of a motion and to try to provide that to the state of North Carolina and to try to get a confirmation about whether our analysis was correct easily between 60 and 100 hours.
And did you reach any preliminary thoughts or thoughts after you reviewed the information and studied the scientific documentation about what was in there?
I mean, I reached a conclusion, like what I thought that it showed, and yeah.
And did you communicate that conclusion to anybody else, including other defense lawyers?
I did. I mean, the first thing that I found actually was the pubic hair comb, Section 2 of the pubic hair comb, had what it seemed to me from reading all this stuff and cross-referencing it, male DNA that did not match any of the lacrosse players or any of, which includes the people who were indicted. And I found that after looking at all this, I found it one night, like around 6 or 7, and Joe was still in the office, so I said, I'd like to talk to you about this, and what do you think about this? And I think he kind of thought that, he said, that's interesting, but, we need to make sure that's right before we do anything with it. And I called Jim Cooney, who, was involved in the case at that point in time and who knows far more about expert testimony and science than I do. And I said, Jim, I think I found foreign male DNA that hasn't been reported to us and doesn't match our clients on the pubic hair, on one section of the pubic hair comb. And Jim had much the same response, which was, because, you have to understand, we had all been in court all summer and fall being told that there wasn't anything that was found or discussed in these meetings with Dr. Meehan, that hadn't been reported to us. And so everybody down the line, and then, of course, I sent an email to Doug Kingsbury, and I said, Doug, I think I found male DNA on one of the rape kit items that doesn't match the lacrosse players. And his response was the same thing. Wow, we really need to run this by a DNA expert before we do anything with it. And then over the next couple of days, it just kept getting worse. I mean, I would find another one of the items that had male DNA that excluded our clients and their teammates, and then another, and then another, and then another. And so what I did at the conclusion of that process was I drafted probably about a 40-page memo about it that cross-referenced all these materials and circulated that to the defense lawyers. And I called Rob and Chris in D.C., and I asked them for a meeting with Hal Dedman, who was the DNA expert that they had available. And they said, okay, and set up a meeting for December the 8th. And I flew to Washington, and I met with Hal Dedman and Rob Carey all day on December the 8th, and we went through, Hal had an opportunity to review my memo, and we went through some of the materials, and we talked about it, and at the conclusion of that meeting, he essentially confirmed what the analysis was, and I communicated that, immediately called Joe and told him, and then we set up a meeting for the defense lawyers to talk about this. I think I called Jim also, and then we set up, I called the Evanses first, and then I called Joe, and then I called Jim, and then we set up a meeting to talk about it and agreed that what we needed to do was convert this information to a motion to compel production of additional discovery materials. And said nothing during those meetings beyond what was encompassed in the final report of DNA security dated May 12, 2006. The court accepted Mr. Nifong's representation about those meetings and held that there were no additional discoverable statements by Dr. Meehan for the state to produce, transcript 24 to 29.